Inception is one of the greatest sci fi movies ever made. Directed by Christopher Nolan, the story follows a team of people who travel through different levels of dreams to plant an idea in someone's mind. The movie is famous for its complex story and its ending, which people still debate today. The main goal of the mission is to convince Robert Fisher, played by Cillian Murphy, to break up his father's company. A businessman named Saito hires Dom Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his team to make this happen through a process called Inception. The dream levels at a glance. Level 1 is reality, level 2 is rainy city, level 3 is hotel, and level 4 is snow fortress, and level 5 is limbo. Reality, where it all begins. Before entering any dream, the team starts in the real world to tell dreams apart from reality. Each team member carries a special object called a totem. Only it its owner knows exactly how it feels or moves. So if something feels off in the dream, the totem reveals it. In the real world, Saito arranges for Fisher to fly on a commercial plane instead of his private jet. Cobb's team sits around him, gives him a sedative, and connects everyone to a shared dreaming machine. This is where the mission begins. Cobb's famous spinning top totem plays big role in the movie's ending. The film cuts before we see whether it stops spinning, leaving viewers to wonder if Cobb is still dreaming or finally back in reality. Since the team goes through multiple dream levels, they need a safe way to wake everyone up at the right time. This method is called the kick. Think of that sudden falling feels that sometimes wake you up from sleep. This is basically what the kick does. It creates that in jolt to snap the dreamers awake. However, because the team is sharing dreams across several levels, the kick has to happen at every level at the same time, starting from the deepest level and working upward. To keep everyone in sync, the team uses a piece of music as a warning signal before each kick happens. The level 1, the rainy city. The first dream level is a large rainy city designed by Aridan, the team's architect. The rain exists because the dreamer of this level, Yusuf, needs to use the bathroom in real life. The goal here is to plant the first seed of the idea in Fisher's mind. A team member named MS pretends to be Fisher's uncle Peter, a person Fisher trusts deeply. He tells Fisher about a secret that would allow him to break up his father's company. He also hints that Fisher's father actually loved him, setting up an emotional moment for a later reveal. Thinking he does not Things do not go smoothly, Fisher's mind has been trained to fight off intruders. So armed guards appear and begin chasing the team. Cobb's guilty memory of his dead wife Mel also causes a problem by sending a train to attack him. When this level is done, user stays behind to keep the dream running while everyone else goes deeper into the next level. Level 2, the hotel. The second dream level takes takes place inside a fancy hotel. Arthur Joseph Jordan Levitt is the dreamer here. To gain Fisher's trust, Cobb pretends to be security agent named Mr. Charles, who is there to protect Fisher's mind. This trick this tricks Fishers to believing Cobb's team is actually on his side. This level contains the famous zero gravity hallway fight scene because Yusuf's van is falling in the level above. Gravity disappears in the hotel, forcing Arthur to fight while floating through the corridors. The goal here is to convince Fishers that the cigarette is not a threat, and that his godfather, Uncle Peter, is actually plotting against him. Because of the falling van above, Arthur has to improvise the cake by using elevator explosive instead of using original plan. Level 3 is the Snow Fortress. The third dream level is a snowy military hospital that looks like a fortress. Emma's is the dreamer here. This is where the actual inception finally takes place. After fighting through heavy security, Vicious enters a room where he finds a protection of his dying father. His father tells him that he was only disappointed because Fishers never tried to be his own person. Fisher also finds a childhood windmill toy inside the safe representing a warm memory of his father. This emotional moment is the heart of entire mission. Cobb believed that positive emotions would make the planted idea stick better than negative ones. By giving Fisher a sense of healing and closure, the team makes him feel that breaking up his father's company is actually his own idea and the right thing to do. When the mission at this level is complete, the fortress is blown up as the kick. The level 5 is Limbo. Limbo is the deepest and most dangerous dream level. It is described as raw subconsciousness, a place with no rules and no clear boundaries between what is real and what is not. Time moves so slowly here that a few minutes in the real world can feel like decades in Limbo. Limbo was not the part of original plan. Fisher gets killed by Cobb's projection of Mal, and Saito dies from a wound he suffered earlier. Both men fall into limbo. Cobb and Ariadne choose to go into limbo to bring them back. Once Cobb finally gets lets go of his guilt over Mal, Fisher is freed and kicks back up to level 3 with Ariadne. Cobb then searches for Saito, who has grown old because so much time has passed in limbo. Cobb reminds him of reality, and the two men shoot themselves in limbo to wake up back in the real world. Nolan designed each dream level to look and feel completely different so that audiences would never get confused about whether the characters were where the characters were. He explained it's raining in level 1, it's a night interior in level 2, and it's an exterior with snow in level 3. Even if you are cutting to a close up of Yusuf in the van, you know where you are because the rain is there. To bring these level to life, the team filmed in 6 different countries and built massive real world sets. Christopher Nolan has always been fascinated with time. His early films like Memento told stories in reverse order. Later films like Interstellar and Tenet played with time in even bigger ways. Inception fits perfectly into this theme. Each dream level runs at different speed than the one above it. What feels like an hour on one level might only be a few minutes on the level above. This forces the characters to work at different paces and creates the tense layered storytelling that makes Inception so unique. As Nolan once said, the camera is a time machine, it captures time. The 5 stages of Inception are the perfect example of that idea in action. After more than a decade since its release, Inception remains one of the most ambitious, mind bending, and passionately debated films in the history of modern cinema. But does Inception still holds up in 2026? Is Inception worth watching or for the first time or the fifth time? How does Inception compare to other landmark science fictions and psychological thriller films? And what does that spinning top In this comprehensive Inception review and analysis, we answer every single one of those questions and more. Is this com- Inception video? We will talk about the storyline in detail, summarize the plot, and explore the extraordinary Inception cast and their character. Deep dive into its history and examine the box office and talk about its critical reception from both professional critics and general audience worldwide. We will see how Inception connects to director Christopher Nolan's broader filmography and more, and explore what makes Inception such a uniquely singular achievement in blockbuster filmmaking. We will also compare Inception to other films in the science fiction and psychological thriller genre, including The Matrix, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Interstellar, Shutter Island, Memento, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. We will explore the remarkable Inception cast, including Leonardo DiCaprio, Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Arthur, Elliot Page as Ariadne, Tom Hardy as Amos, Ken Watanabe as Santo, and Maureen as Mel. We will discuss Inception, streaming availability, and all other programs. Provide multiple Inception reviews from range of critical perspectives, share the most fascinating Inception Easter eggs and hidden details. Whether you are a die-hard Christopher Nolan fan returning to revisit a masterpiece, a first-time viewer wondering whether Inception lives up to its towering reputation, or simply someone curious about what makes Inception one of the most discussed films of the 21st century. This complete Inception breakdown has absolutely everything you need. So, without any further delay, let's get started with our full Inception review. So, first, why Inception matters. To truly understand Inception, we must examine the cultural, cinematic, and creative landscape that made Inception possible, and why Inception continues to matter so profoundly more than 16 years after its original theatrical release. Inception arrived in the summer of 2010, at a moment when Hollywood blockbusters were increasingly dominated by sequels, reboots, and franchise installments. Against that backdrop, Inception represented something genuinely rare, a wholly original, big budget, high concept studio film built entirely from the imagination of a single filmmaker. Inception was not based on a novel, comic book, or pre existing intellectual property. Inception was not a sequel. Inception was not a remake. Inception was purely and simply an original idea and a spectacularly ambitious one. Director Christopher Nolan spent nearly a decade developing Inception before cameras ever rolled. That extraordinary level of dedication and refinement is evident in every frame of Inception, from its intricately constructed narrative architecture to its groundbreaking practical visual effects. Inception demonstrated what is possible when filmmaker of uncommon vision is given both the creative freedom and the financial resources to fully realize that vision on screen. Inception changed the conversation about what a mainstream blockbuster could be. Inception proved that audiences would not only accept but actively embrace films that demanded intellectual engagement, rewarded careful attention, and refused to offer easy answers. Inception, in short, raised the bar for ambitious studio filmmaking, and that bar has rarely been cleared in the years since. Understanding Inception means understanding Christopher Nolan, understanding the science fiction and psychology thriller genre, and understanding the specific creative movement in which Inception was conceived, developed, and ultimately delivered to the world. Inception did not emerge from a vacuum. To fully appreciate what Inception achieved, it is essential to trace the filmmaking career of Christopher Nolan and understanding how each step in his journey led directly toward the creation of Inception. Christopher Nolan was born on July 30, 1970, in London, England. Nolan developed his passion for filmmaking during his studies at University College London, where he honed his craft making short film with the UCL Film Society. Nolan's debut feature following releases in 1998 announced the arrival of filmmaking with an immediately distinctive and sophisticated approach to narrative structure. Following was shot on budget of approximately $6,000, yet it displayed the non-linear storytelling instinct and thematic preoccupation, preoccupation, identity, deception, memory, moral ambiguity that would come to define Nolan's entire body of work, including Inception. Nolan's breakthrough came with Memento in 2000. Memento told the story of a man suffering from short-term memory loss, using a reverse chronological narrative structure that places audiences in the disorienting subjective experience of its protagonist. Memento earned Nolan an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay and established him as one of the most intellectually daring filmmakers of his generation. The technique Nolan refined in Memento, non-linear structure, unreliable perspective, the architecture of memory became foundational building blocks for Inception. Following Memento, Nolan directed Insomnia in 2002, a psychologically crime thriller starring Al Pacino and Robin Williams. Insomnia demonstrated Nolan's ability to work within genre conventions while simultaneously elevating them, a skill that would serve Inception enormously when Nolan crafted his complex conceptual ambitions onto the structure of a heist film. Then came the defining chapter of Nolan's pre-Inception career, the Dark Knight trilogy, beginning with Batman begins with Bat beginning with Batman Begins in 2005 and continuing with the Dark Knight in 2008 and concluding later with The Dark Knight Rises in 2012. Nolan's superhero trilogy redefined what comic book adaptations could be, bringing psychological depth, moral complexity, and a ground sense of reality to the genre. The ability to the genre, The Dark Knight is particularly released just 2 years before Inception, earned over $1 billion at the worldwide box office and won Heath Ledger a posthumous Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. The extraordinary commercial and critical success of The Dark Knight gave Nolan the standing and the studio confidence to pursue Inception on his own terms. With full creative control and a budget of approximately $160 million between the Dark Knight films, Nolan also directed The Prestige in 2006, a Victorian era mystery about rival magicians starring Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman. The Prestige explored themes of obsession, duality, sacrifice, and illusion, themes that resonate deeply throughout Inception. The structure of the Prestige, built around misdirection and revelation, directly informed how Nolan would construct the layer architecture of Inception. By the time Inception entered production, Christopher Nolan had established himself as arguably the most commercially powerful and critically respected director working in mainstream cinema. Inception was the film Nolan had been building outward his entire career, a synthesis of everything he had learned about narrative structure, visual storytelling, thematic ambition, and the nature of human consciousness. Inception occupies a fascinating and somewhat unusual position within both the science fiction and psychological thriller genre, and understanding those genres illuminates what Inception is trying to accomplish and why Inception succeeds so remarkably at its goal. Science fiction as a genre has always been primarily concerned with exploring human experience through the lens of speculative technology and altered reality. For the earliest days of the genre, science fiction has used imagined features and impossible technologies not simply as spectacle but as psychological injury. Films like 2001 A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick, used the framework of space exploration to ask fundamental questions about human consciousness and evolution. Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott, used the concept of artificial human beings to examine what constitutes identity and authentic experience. The Matrix 1999, directed by the Wachowskis, built an entire action blockbuster around the psychological question of whether our perceived reality is genuine or constructed. Inception belongs firmly in this tradition of idea-driven science fiction. The central technology of Inception, a device that allowed trained operatives to enter the shared dream space of a sleeping subject, is presented not as magic or fantasy but as a pulsable, a speculative extension of exciting existing psychological and neurological research. Inception grounds its extraordinary premises in procedural specificity, establishing clear rules for how dreams sharing works, what the risks are, and why the stakes of the Inception mission are so extraordinarily high. This grounding in the internal logic is one of the defining characteristics of the best science fiction, and Inception exemplifies it. The psychological thriller genre, meanwhile, has a long and distinguished history of fusing perception, memory, and identity as its primary tools of suspense and engagement. Films like Vertigo, Alfred Hitchcock's masterwork of obsession and false identity, or Mulholland Drive 2001, David Lynch's dreamlike deconstruction of Hollywood mythology, or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Michel Gondry's profound meditation on love and memory. All of these films explore the ways in which the human mind constructs, distorts, and sometimes destroys its own vision of reality. Inception 2010 movie draws directly from this transition, using the mechanics of dreaming to create a psychological thriller of extraordinary complexity and emotional depth. What makes Inception unique within both of these genres is the way in which it combines their perspective strength. Inception movie delivers the big screen spectacle and narrative sweep of the best science fiction blockbusters while simultaneously engaging with the intimate psychological interiority of the finest psychological thrillers. Inception movie is at once a heist film, a science fiction epic, a psychological mystery, and perhaps most importantly, a deeply personal story about grief, guilt, and the courage required to confront painful truth. The ending of Inception movie, which we will discuss in detail later in this video, became perhaps the single most debated cinematic conclusion of the entire decade. The image of the spinning top dome Cobb's totem The object he uses to distinguish his dream from reality became an instantly iconic symbol, reproduced on countless merchandise items, referenced in other films and television shows, and analyzed in academic papers on cinema and philosophy. Inception also exerted a measurable influence on the broader landscape of blockbuster filmmaking in the years that followed. The film's success demonstrated conclusively that mainstream audiences were hungry for challenging idea-driven narratives, contributing to a subsequent wave of high-concept genre films that aspire to similar level of intellectual ambitions. The word inception itself entered common usage as shorthand for ideas within ideas, layered concepts, or recursive structures, a remarkable testament to how completely the film captured the public imaginations. By early 2010, anticipation for Inception movie had reached extraordinary levels. The marketing campaign for Inception was itself a masterclass in controlled mystery and strategic revelation. The Inception movie trailers released by Warner Bros. Showed enough of the film's stunning visual concepts, collapsing cityscapes, gravity-defying action sequences, men in suits running across impossible architecture to generate intense curiosity while revealing almost nothing about the actual story. The release of Inception represented a genuine cinematic event, the kind of shared cultural movement that brings audiences together in theater not simply to be entertained but to experience something genuinely new. Inception delivered on that promise completely, and the conversation it started has never really stopped. The Inception plot picks up, or rather begins, in a place of profound ambiguity. The opening moments of Inception deposit us immediately inside a dream, though we do not yet know that an older man is dragged from the ocean to the shore of an op- opulent estate. Two young children play on a beach in the distance, their faces turned away. Armed guards bring the older man before a Japanese lord, and Dom Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, sits at the table with a spinning top and a pistol. The Inception story, from its very first image, refuses to offer easy orientation. We are inside our dream within a dream. At the beginning of the film, though, the Inception movie screenplay reveals this only gradually and with remarkable precision. This opening sequence in Inception movie is not merely stylistically bold, it is structurally essential, establishing the film's central thematic concern for the very first frame, the blurred, dangerous, seductive boundary between what is real and what is dreamed. So, who is Dom Cobb? The Inception plot proper begins with Dom Cobb and his partner Arthur, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, attempting to extract classified information from the mind of a sleeping businessman named Saito, played by Ken Watanabe. This Inception movie opening sequence establishes the rules of the film's world with elegant efficiency. Cobb and Arthur are extractors, specialists who use experimental military technologies to enter the shared dream space of a subject and steal their secrets from within the dream. The inception extraction attempts attempt goes wrong when Cobb's subconsciousness produces a dangerous and unexpected element. A woman named Mel, played by Marion Cotillard, in Inception, Mal is not simply a character, she is a projection of Cobb's guilt, grief, and unresolved psychological trauma. The appearance of Mal during the Inception opening extraction sequence immediately signals to the audience that Dom Cobb is a man haunted literally by his past. The Inception screenplay reveals Cobb's situation through careful, rational exposition. Cobb is a fatigue. He cannot return to the United States, and critically, he cannot return to his children because he has been falsely accused of murdering his wife, Mel. Cobb lives in exile, moving from country to country, taking extraction jobs because it is the only skill he possesses and the only way he knows to survive. This is emotional foundations upon which all of Inception is built. Every spectacular set piece, every intricate dream within a dream, every gravity defining action sequence in Inception exists in service of his fundamentally human story of father trying to find his way home to his children. The Inception plot, for all its conceptual complexity, is at its core an emotionally straightforward story about love, loss, and the courage to let go. Rather than pushing Cobb for the failed extraction, Saito, who knows how to have been testing Cobb's ability rather than being a genuine mark, makes Cobb an extraordinary offer. This pivotal moment in Inception movie reframes everything that came before and launches the film's critical mission. Saito proposes the Cobb perform not an extraction but its conceptual opposite, inception. Instead of stealing an idea from someone's mind, Cobb must plant one. The inception target is Robert Fisher, played by Cillian Murphy, the hired heir to a vast energy corporation. Saito wants Fisher to believe genuinely, organically, from the deepest level of his own subconsciousness that he should dismantle his dying father's empire rather than inherit it. In exchange for successful performing this act of inception, Saito promises to use his considerable influence to clear Cobb's name and allow him to return home to his children. For Cobb, this proposition proposition in exchange for successful performing this act of inception, Saito promises to use his considerable influence. The Inception movie premise in thus established. The mission is clear, the stakes are defined, and the profound challenge of what Cobb has agreed to undertake. Inception has never been successfully performed because planting an idea so deeply that the subject believes it originated within themselves is experimentally more difficult than simply stealing one is more is made explicit. Cobb accepts Inception's ensemble, a significant and deeply enjoyable section of the Inception plot is devoted to Cobb assembling the specialist team required to perform the Inception on Robert Fisher. This section of Inception functions similarly to the classic heist film tradition of the crew assembly sequence, and it is executed with tremendous energy. Cobb begins with Arthur, his trusted point man who handles research and logistical planning. In Inception, Arthur is established as the precise, methodical counterbalance to Cobb's more intuitive and commercially complicated approach. Joseph Jordan Levitt brings a dry intelligence and physical precision to Arthur in Inception that makes the character both immediately likable and distinctly memorable. Next, Cobb recruits Ariadne, a name chosen with obvious methodological
intentionally referring to the figure in Greek mythology who provide who, prov- who provide Theseus with the thread to navigate the labyrinth. In Inception, Ariana is brilliant young architecture student discovered by Cobb's mentor Professor Miles, played by Michelle Caine. Ariadne in Inception solves the vital function of designing the dream environments into which the team will venture, constructing the labyrinth of the subconsciousness through which they must navigate. Crucially, Ariadne also serves as the audience's surrogate within the Inception movie's narrative. It is thought Ariadne's process of learning the rules, understanding the risk, and eventually uncovering the truth about Cope's relationship with Mel that the audience comes to understand the full emotional and psychological stake of Inception. MS, played with enormous and irrelevant charm by Tom Hardy, joins the Inception team as a forger, someone capable of assuming the appearance of other people within the dream, impersonating them convincingly through the influence and the subject's behavior. Tom Hardy's MS in Inception provides much of the film's humor and a great deal of its science sequence momentum. Yusuf, played by Dilip Rao, completes the core Inception team as the chemist responsible for designing the powerful sedative compound that will allow the team to enter the multiple dream levels required for the mission. The sedative Yusuf develops for Inception is critically important because the team intends to go 3 levels deep into Fisher's subconsciousness, a dream within a dream within a dream. The compound must be powerful enough to maintain the team's sedation across all 3 levels simultaneously. Finally, Saito himself insists on participating in the Inception mission, accompanying the team personally rather than simply financing the operation from a distance. This decision by Saito in Inception has significant sequences for the mission's larger complications. With the Inception team assembled and the plan established, the film's extraordinary central act begins. The Inception plan involves 3 distinct dream levels, each nested within the one above it, each operating on a different subjective time scale. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, running throughout all 3 Inception dream levels and threatening to destroy the mission at every turn is Cobb's unresolved psychological trauma in the form of Mel. The Inception backstory of Tom Cobb and Mel is revealed gradually and with great care. Years before the event of Inception, Cobb and Mel were researchers exploring the possibilities of dream sharing. Together, they descended into the deepest possible dream state, limbo, where they spent what felt like 50 years building an entire world from their shared imaginations. When it came time to return to the real world, Mel refused. She had forgotten in Inception's term that their limbo world was not real. To convince her, Co performed Inception on himself. He planted the idea in her mind that this world was not real and that she needed to die to wake up. The Inception on Mel worked and they returned to working life. But the planted idea, the certainly certainty that the world was not real never left Mel's subconsciousness. The Inception tragedy in the Mel fully awake in the real world still could not shake the idea Cobb had planted. She became convinced that the real waking life was itself a dream, and that only death would bring her home. Mel jumped from a hotel window, and Cobb, the man who planted the idea that destroyed her, could not save her. This Inception backstory is the source of everything. Cobb's guilt over Mel's death drives him. His inability to let her go, to stop projecting her into every dream he enters in, what is what makes him a liability on the Inception mission. And Ariadne's growing understanding of this Inception psychological wound is what ultimately compels her to descend into limbo with Cobb in the film's final act. The Inception climax operates simultaneously across all four dream levels, including limbo, in a sequence of parallel editing that is among the most technically accomplished in the contemporary cinema. Cobb and Saito have fallen into limbo. Fisher has been shot in the third level dream by Mel's projection and is also drifting into limbo. Ariadne chooses to accompany Cobb into the deepest dream state to help him find Fisher and, most importantly, to confront his relationship with Mel. The Inception limbo sequences that take place in a decade crumbling version of the city Cobb and Mel built during their decade of shared dreaming. In Inception's limbo, Cobb finds Mel one final time, not a memory but a projection of his own subconsciousness, the manifestation of his guilt and his unwillingness to fully accept that death and let her go. The Inception confrontation in limbo between Cobb and his projection of Mel in the film's emotional and thematical climax. Cobb finally articulates what he has refused to admit, that this Mel is not real, that the real Mel is gone. Their loves her now means accepting their loss rather than holding on to a dream. It is the most powerful sequence in Inception movie, quite intimate and devastating. Ariadne and Fisher escape limbo via a jump from the crumbling building, a death within the dream that kicks them back up through the levels. Cobb remains in limbo to find Saito, who has aged to an old man in the timeless space of the deepest dream. The Inception movie final act returns us to where the film began, the beach, the state, the old man being brought before Saito. Now we understand the older man is Saito in limbo. The arrival on the shore is Cobb reaching him. Their exchange, "come back so we can be young men together again," is one of the most quietly beautiful lines in all of Inception. The Inception ending sees Cobb returning through customs in Los Angeles, his name cleared. He runs in his house. He calls out his children. They turn around, faces finally visible, no longer turned away. Cobb reaches for his totem. The spinning top sets it spinning on the table and then critically walks away to embarrass his children without waiting to see whether it falls. The Inception spinning top wobbles. The film cuts to black. The Inception ending remains deliberately, precisely, and gloriously ambiguous. The themes are more than just a puzzle. For art, its complexity, Inception is fundamentally a film about grief, guilt, and the danger of living in the past. Cobb's entire arc is about his inability to let go of Mal. He knows one of he knows on a rational level that the projection of Mal he carries in his subconsciousness is not real. He knows it as a reflection of his own guilt, his own fear that he discovered her by messing with her mind. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are two different things. Cobb keeps the projection alive because letting it go means truly accepting that Mal is dead and that he has to move on without her. This theme resonates far beyond the world of the film. Most people have experienced grief in some form. Most people know what it feels like to cling to something that is gone. A relationship, a person, a version of yourself that no longer exists. Cobb's journey is an extreme science fiction version of something deeply human and recognizable. The film also explores the idea of reality and perception. If an idea can be planted in someone's mind so deeply that they believe it is their own, they does that what does that says about the nature of belief? How many of our deeply held conventions are planted there by outside forces? How much of what we accept as real is actually a construction, a story we tell ourselves because the alternative is too frightening? These questions are woven into the film at entry level, from the literal dream layers to the ambiguous ending. Nolan never answers them directly because this is not the point. The point is to make you ask them about the characters, about yourself. The theme of parenthood is also central to the film. Cobb's driving motivation throughout is the desire to see his children. This is what makes him vulnerable, what makes him take dangerous risks, and what ultimately gives him the strength to face his guilt. The image of his children playing in the sunlight, always seen from behind, never turning to face him, becomes the film's most powerful recurring motif. When they finally turn around in the last scene, it is one of the most emotionally loaded moments in Nolan's entire filmography. The ending is the most debated final scene in modern cinema. No review of Inception can avoid the ending. After the mission is complete, Cobb finally returns home to his children. He spins his totem, the spinning top that was originally Mel's, to check whether he is dreaming or awake. In the dream to stop, in the dream, the top would spin forever. In reality, it would eventually fall. He watches it spin and then turns away to embarrass his children, finally able to see their faces. The camera stays on the spinning top. It wobbles slightly, and then the screen black, cuts to black before we can see whether it falls or keeps spinning. That cut to black is one of the most brilliantly frustrating moments in modern cinema. It splits audiences right down the middle. Some people are certain Cobb is dreaming, others are equally certain he is awake, and a significant number of people have come to believe that the question itself is the point that the film is asking us to consider whether it matters. Several details support both interpretations. The children appear to be wearing the same clothes as they were in Cobb's memory, and they are in the same position, which suggests he might be dreaming. On the other hand, his wedding ring, which he wears in every dream sequence, is absent in the final scene, which suggests he might be awake. The top wobbles before the cut, which some argue suggests it is about to fall. Christopher Nolan has carefully avoided giving a definite answer for over a decade. Leonardo DiCaprio as Tom Cobb. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Dom Cobb in Inception, the film's central protagonist and emotional anchor. The character of Dom Cobb in Inception is a master extractor, a trained specialist in the art of entering people's dream and stealing their secrets. Who carries an overwhelming burden of guilt and grief over the death of his wife. In Inception movie, Cobb's desperate need to return to his children and his unresolved unresolved psychological trauma over Mel's death create the emotional engine that drives the entire film. Leonardo DiCaprio's performance in Inception is a steady, in controlled, barely contained anguish performance of tremendous internal complexities delivered through subtle, precise choices rather than showy exhibition. Leonardo DiCaprio was born on 11 November 1974 in Los Angeles, California. Before Inception, DiCaprio had already established himself as one of the defining actors of his generation through a career remarkable for both its commercial reach and its artistic ambition. DiCaprio's early film breakthrough came with This Boy's Life in 1993, in which a teenage DiCaprio started opposite Robert De Niro. DiCaprio's fearless, psychologically complex performance in This Boy's Life demonstrated at an extremely young age that he was capable of holding his own against the most formidable acting talent in Hollywood. In the same year, DiCaprio received his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of Arnie Grape in the What's Eating Gilbert Grape, directed by Lasse Hallström. DiCaprio's performance in What's Eating Gilbert Grape remains one of the most celebrated pieces of young acting in the American film history, a complete physical and psychological transformation delivered with heartbreaking authenticity. The global commercial peak of DiCaprio's early career came with Titanic in 1997, directed by James Cameron. Titanic earned over $2.18 billion worldwide at the time of its release, making it the highest grossing film in history, a record it held for 12 years. DiCaprio's roles as Jack Dawson in Titanic made him the most recognizable film star on the planet. Yet DiCaprio, with characteristic artistic integrity, used the enormous leverage that Titanic gave him not to consolidate his position as a conventional leading man, but to pursue increasingly challenging and unconventional projects. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays Arthur in Inception 2010 movie. Dom Cobb's trusted point man and the Inception team's operational anchor. Arthur in Inception is responsible for research, logistics, and maintaining stability within the dream environments, while Cobb pursues the more emotional, complex dimensions of the mission. Jordan Levitt brings a drive with physical precision and understanding intelligence to Arthur in Inception that makes the character both immediately engaging and equally indisposable. Leod Page plays Ariadne in Inception movie, the brilliant young architect recruited to design the labyrinth dream environments of the Inception mission. Ariadne in Inception is the audience's guide and surrogate, the character through whose learning process, the rules and emotional stakes of the Inception world are revealed. Page brings extraordinary intelligence, warmth, and more clarity to Ariadne in Inception, grounding the film's most conceptual, complex moments in genuinely human feeling. Tom Hardy plays MS in Inception, the team's forger, a specialist capable of impersonating other people within the dream environment to manipulate a subject's behavior. MS in Inception is the film's most overly entertaining character, irreverent, physically confident, wickedly funny, and enormously capable. Tom Hardy's performance in Inception strikes precisely the right tone, providing levity and momentum without undermining the film's emotional seriousness. In Inception, Tom Hardy's Emma's provided the mission's most crucial emotional manipulation. His impersonation of Peter Browning on the third dream level is what guides Robert Fisher toward the safe and the buried emotional truth within it. That Emma accomplishes this with such casual confidence and good humor in a testament to Tom's formidable natural charisma as a performer. Cillian Murphy as Robert Fisher. Cillian Murphy plays Robert Fisher in Inception, the film's normal target. The film's nominal target. The billionaire here hire whose subconsciousness the Inception team must infiltrate and within whose mind the Inception must be planted. Robert Fisher in Inception is, in a sense, the film's hidden protagonist, a man who does not know he is in a story, who experiences the Inception event as his own psychological journey and whose emotional breakthrough, however, it was engineered in is depicted with genuinely sympathy and care. Murphy was born on May 25, 1976 in Douglas, County Cork, Ireland. Before Inception, Murphy had appeared in Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins as Dr. Jonathan Crane, better known as Scarecrow, establishing the Nolan-Murphy collaboration that Inception continued. In Inception 2010 movie, Murphy navigates the extraordinary challenge of playing a character who is simultaneously the mission's object and the film's most emotionally compelling figure. His portrayal of Fisher's breakdown at his father's bedside, the moment when he planted idea takes root and Fisher confronts the buried truth of his relationship with Murray Fisher's, is Inception's most quietly devastating sequence, and Murphy delivers it with complete heartbreaking authenticity. To fully appreciate what Inception achieves, it helps enormously to compare Inception to similar films across the science fiction, psychological thriller, and high concept blockbuster genre. Inception shares significant DNA with several landmark films, including The Matrix, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Memento, Shutter Island, 2001, A Space Odyssey, Interstellar, The Prestige, and Dark City. By examining how Inception relates to each of these films, we can better understand precisely what makes Inception unique, why Inception surpasses its contemporaries and predecessors, and in which areas other films offer something that Inception does not. Inception is a film that wears its influence openly while transcending them. Christopher Nolan has spoken extensively in interviews about the films and filmmakers that shaped his vision for Inception, and those influences are visible throughout the film for anyone who cares to look. At the same time, Inception synthesizes those influences into something genuinely original, a film with a distinct personality, a specific emotional agenda, and a formal architecture that belongs entirely to itself. The comparison that follow are not intended to diminish Inception but to illuminate it, to place Inception in the context of the broader cinematic tradition to which it belongs and against which it should be measured. Understanding how Inception relates to the Matrix, the Eternal Sunshine, the Memento, and to the other films we will examine here here is essential for a complete appreciation of Inception's extraordinary achievement. Comparing with The Matrix 1999, The Matrix, directed by Wachowski and released in 1999, is the single most frequently cited comparison point for Inception, and the comparison is both illuminating and revealing in its limits. The Matrix earned over $460 million worldwide against a $63 million budget and scored an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes. Directed by Lily and Lane and starring Keanu Reeves as Neo alongside Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie Ann Moss, and Hugo Weaving, The Matrix constructed an entirely simulated reality, a computer program in which all of the humanity is unknowingly imprisoned, and build a revolutionary action blockbuster around this philosophy question of continues constitutes authentic reality. When comparing Inception to The Matrix, the most obvious similarities are structural. Both Inception and The Matrix center on protagonists who discover that perceived reality is constructed rather than given. And both films use spectacular action sequences to determine the im- implications of their discovery. Both Inception and The Matrix feature ensemble teams of specialist operations operating within an artificial reality, and both films are concerned with the questions of what distinguishes genuine experiences from simulation. However, Inception differs from The Matrix in crucial and illuminating ways. While The Matrix ultimately offers a relatively clear answer to its psychological question, there is a real world, and Neo's mission is to reach it. Inception refuses that clarity entirely. Inception ends without confirming whether Cobb is in a dream or in reality, making the film's philosophical inquiry genuinely open rather than dramatically resolved. Inception also differs from The Matrix in its emotional focus. The Matrix is primarily a film about collective liberation, freeing humanity from semantic imprisonment. Inception is a film about individual psychological healing, a single man's journey toward accepting grief and returning to love. This ultimate this intimate personal emotional core gives Inception a different kind of depth than The Matrix possesses. Both films are landmarks of the science fiction genre, and the both Inception and The Matrix reward repeated reviewing with new layers of meaning. They are companion films more than competitors, different answers to related questions. Inception versus Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind. Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind, directed by Michel Gondry from a screenplay by Charlie Kaufman and released in 2004, represents perhaps the most thematically resonant comparison point for Inception, though it is a film that Inception rarely acknowledges in public discourse. Eternal Sunshine earned over $72 million worldwide, won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, and holds a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, starring Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet. Eternal Sunshine tells the story of a couple who undergo a medical procedure to erase each other from their memories following a painful breakup, and then within the procedure begin to fight for those memories as they realize what they are losing. When comparing Inception to Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind, the thematic parallels are striking. Both Inception and Eternal Sunshine are fundamentally concerned with the relationship between love, memory, and loss. Both films use the eternal landscape of the mind as their primary setting, Both Inception and Eternal Sunshine features protagonists haunted by the memories of a woman they have loved and lost, and both films ultimately arrive at the same emotional conclusion that the painful truth of real experience is more valuable than the comfortable escape of constructed memory. Eternal Sunshine achieves its emotional impact through a looser, more dreamlike, formally fragmented approach than Inception, where Inception builds its emotional architecture through precise, almost mathematical structural construction. Eternal Sunshine achieves its effect through accumulated emotional impressions, or a more intensive, less controlled approach than some viewer might find immediately affecting. Both Inception and Eternal Sunshine of Exception are exceptional films, and both repay careful attention with genuine emotional depth. Fan of either film will likely find profound reward in the other, and watching Inception and Eternal Sunshine is close proximity reveals very how two very different filmmakers can use the same fundamental emotional and conceptual territory to create radical different and equally valid cinematic experience. Inception versus Momentum.
I finally sat down and watched Inception, a film that has loomed large in modern cinema conversations for years, often described as one of the defining movies of the 21st century. For a long time, it remained one of those glaring omissions on my personal watch list, a movie I knew I should see, but kept putting off. The delay wasn't accidental. Part of it came from a kind of hesitation, almost intimidation. Inception carries a reputation, dense, intellectual, layered to the point where it feels like you need a guidebook just to keep up. I had built it up in my mind as one of those films that demands total concentration and still leaves the average viewer scratching their head. That expectation wasn't entirely unfounded, at least based on my past experiences with other complex, high-concept movies. I've noticed a pattern with films that lean heavily into intricate plots or layered storytelling. I tend to follow along just fine for the first hour or so, maybe even feeling confident that I've grasped everything. Then, somewhere around the midway point, usually an hour and 15 minutes in, it all starts slipping away. The plot threads become tangled, the pacing accelerates, and suddenly I'm left trying to piece together what's happening while the film barrels forward without waiting for me. It's happened before with movies like Minority Report, The Fugitive, and Flight Plan. Each time, I start strong and end confused. So naturally, I assumed Inception would follow that same trajectory, perhaps even more intensely given its reputation. But to my surprise, that wasn't the case at all. Not only was I able to keep up with the story for most of the runtime, but I actually found myself genuinely engaged and entertained in a way I hadn't anticipated. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt pulled in. Instead of struggling to understand, I found myself intrigued by how the film unfolded its ideas. I'll admit there was another factor contributing to my hesitation, my mixed feelings about the director's previous work. After watching The Dark Knight for the first time a few months ago, I came away underwhelmed. Considering how widely praised that film is, my reaction surprised even me. It just didn't resonate the way I expected it to. In fairness, I wasn't in the best condition while watching it. I had a persistent headache the entire time, which definitely affected my experience, but even accounting for that, I didn't feel the impact that so many others clearly did. That experience left me with a slight bias going into Inception. I wasn't expecting to dislike it, but I wasn't exactly optimistic either. Still, the DVD had been sitting there for quite some time, and eventually I reached the point where it felt almost overdue. It was one of those movies you can only avoid for so long before curiosity wins. And I'm glad it did, because Inception turned out to be far more enjoyable than I expected. While it's not some hidden gem that I've uniquely discovered, it's been widely discussed and analyzed for over a decade. It absolutely earns its reputation as a well-crafted and engaging film. At its core, the story follows Dom Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, a professional thief of a very unusual kind. Instead of stealing physical objects, Cobb specializes in extracting information directly from people's subconscious minds by entering their dreams. It's a fascinating premise right from the start, blending elements of science fiction with psychological intrigue. Cobb is not working alone. He partners with Arthur, portrayed by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who serves as his reliable and methodical right-hand man. The main conflict begins when Cobb and Arthur are approached by a wealthy businessman named Saito. Rather than hiring them for a standard extraction job, Saito proposes something far more challenging: Inception. Instead of stealing an idea from someone's mind, they must plant one. Specifically, they are tasked with embedding the idea into Robert Fisher's subconscious that he should dismantle his father's business empire. It's a delicate and complex mission, far riskier than anything Cobb has attempted before. To accomplish this, Cobb assembles a specialized team. Each member brings a unique skill set essential to the operation. There's Eames, a charismatic forger capable of manipulating identities within dreams. Ariadne, a brilliant architect who designs the dream environments, effectively shaping the worlds in which the team operates. And Yusuf, a chemist responsible for creating the powerful sedatives that allow for deeper and more stable dream layers. Together, they form a unit that must navigate multiple levels of subconscious reality, each with its own rules and dangers. As the mission progresses, the film introduces an additional complication: Cobb's unresolved past. His deceased wife, Mal, appears within the dream worlds, disrupting the operation and endangering everyone involved. Her presence isn't just a narrative obstacle, it adds emotional depth to Cobb's character, revealing guilt, grief, and inner conflict that complicate his already risky profession. This element transforms the story from a straightforward heist into something more personal and psychologically driven. What stands out most about Inception is its originality. The concept of shared dreaming, layered realities, and time dilation within those layers feels genuinely inventive. It's rare to see a film that presents such a complex idea while still maintaining a sense of structure and coherence. The creativity on display is one of its strongest assets. It doesn't just rely on spectacle, it builds a system, establishes rules, and then explores the consequences of those rules in a way that feels both imaginative and grounded. Visually, the film is impressive. Even watching it at home, it's easy to tell that a tremendous amount of effort and resources went into its production. There are multiple sequences that stand out purely on a visual level, moments where the scale and ambition of the filmmaking are unmistakable. You can practically feel the budget on screen, but more importantly, you can see how thoughtfully it was used. The effects don't feel excessive, they serve the story and enhance the experience rather than distracting from it. It's hard not to imagine how impactful it must have been in a theater setting. Watching it years later, outside of that environment, you can still sense the intended scale, but there's definitely a part of the experience that feels like it belongs on a bigger screen. Of course, when the film was released, I would have been far too young to appreciate it anyway. At that time, my focus was on much lighter, more straightforward entertainment. In a way, watching it now allows for a deeper appreciation of its complexity. The performances across the cast are solid, though not necessarily the primary focus. This isn't a film driven by dramatic character transformations or deeply emotional acting showcases. Instead, the performances serve the narrative, supporting the intricate plot rather than overshadowing it. That said, Leonardo DiCaprio stands out. He brings a level of intensity and vulnerability to Cobb that anchors the film, making the emotional stakes feel real amidst all the high-concept storytelling. One of the most interesting aspects of Inception is how it blends genres. While it is fundamentally a science fiction film, it doesn't lean exclusively on that identity. It incorporates elements of action, thriller, and even drama in a way that feels seamless. For viewers who might not typically enjoy science fiction, the film offers enough familiar elements, car chases, shootouts, emotional conflicts, to keep them engaged. At the same time, it doesn't abandon its sci-fi roots. The manipulation of time and space, the layered dream mechanics, and the philosophical questions about reality all remain central to the experience. The ending deserves special mention. It's one of those conclusions that lingers long after the film is over. Cobb uses a spinning top to determine whether he's in reality or still dreaming. In the final scene, he spins the top and walks away, choosing to focus on his children rather than waiting for the result. The camera lingers on the top as it continues spinning, wavering slightly, leaving the outcome uncertain. It's a simple yet powerful moment, inviting interpretation and discussion. Few endings manage to be both satisfying and ambiguous at the same time, but this one achieves that balance. Of course, the film isn't without its flaws. One issue that stood out early on was the sound mixing. In several scenes, the sound effects are noticeably louder than the dialogue. This creates a frustrating dynamic where you have to constantly adjust the volume, turning it up to hear conversations, then quickly lowering it when an explosion or sudden noise occurs. It's not a deal-breaker, but it can be distracting, especially in the first act. Another minor frustration comes from the viewing format itself. Watching in widescreen, with the black bars framing the image, can make the picture feel smaller than it actually is. While many people are accustomed to this and don't mind it at all, it can take some getting used to if you prefer a full-screen presentation. It's more of a personal preference than an objective flaw, but it does affect the viewing experience to some extent. There are also moments where the layered nature of the story can become slightly confusing. With multiple dream levels operating simultaneously, it can be challenging to keep track of where exactly the characters are at any given time. However, this seems intentional. The film embraces a certain level of complexity and ambiguity, trusting the audience to piece things together rather than spelling everything out. Despite these minor issues, the overall experience remains highly positive. Inception succeeds in being both intellectually engaging and entertaining. It offers enough depth to satisfy viewers looking for something thought-provoking, while still delivering the kind of action and spectacle that keeps the pacing dynamic. In the end, I'm glad to have finally watched it. It's one of those films that feels almost essential, not because it's perfect, but because it represents a significant moment in modern filmmaking. It demonstrates what can be achieved when creativity, technical skill, and storytelling ambition come together. For anyone who enjoys action-heavy films or longer, more immersive narratives, this is an easy recommendation. At the same time, it offers plenty for viewers who appreciate more complex, layered storytelling. It's not a movie you watch once and forget, it invites revisiting, reinterpreting, and discussing. Crossing Inception off my watchlist feels like checking off a major milestone. Even with the countless films I've already seen, there are always more waiting to be discovered. And every now and then, one of them reminds you why movies are worth exploring in the first place.
2000. Comparing Inception to Memento is comparing a filmmaker to himself, and the comparison reveals exactly how much Christopher Nolan grew and extended his ambition between these two masterworks. Memento, Nolan's 2000 breakthrough, earned $39 million worldwide against a budget of approximately $9 million and holds a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. Memento told the story of Leonardo Shelby, a man with anti- anterograde amnesia, the inability to form new memories, investigating his wife's murder through a reverse chronological narrative structure that placed the audience in Leonardo's orienting subjective experience. When comparing Inception movie to Memento, the most immediately apparent connection is thematic. Both films are centrally concerned with the unreliability of memory and the ways in which subjective of perception shapes and distort our understanding of reality. Leonardo in Memento and Don Cobb in Inception are both men who cannot fully trust their own minds, both haunted by the death of their wives and both engaged in a quest that they may be constructing rather than genuinely pursuing. Inception movie expands the structural and conceptual ambitions of Memento to a global blockbuster scale, where Memento was an intimate, relatively low budget psychological thriller. Inception is a $160 million science fiction spectacle. Yet, the emotional and psychological core of both films is strikingly similar. Inception movie is in many ways the Memento impulse realized at maximum scale. Comparing Inception movie to Memento also reveals Nolan's growth as a storyteller of emotional complexities. The Inception's emotional journey is arguably comparing Inception to Christopher Nolan's own Interstellar, released 4 years after Inception in 2014, reveals both the consistency of Nolan's thematic preoccupation and the evolution of his emotional ambition. Interstellar earned over $700 million worldwide and holds a 73% on Rotten Tomatoes, starring Matthew McConaughey and Hathaway and Jessica Chastain. Interstellar tells the story of a NASA pilot who travels through a wormhole in search of a new home for humanity while his daughter ages and grows old back on Earth. Why, when comparing Inception to Interstellar, the most striking parallel is the emotional spine of both films. A father's desperate need to return to his children. Cooper in Interstellar and Cobb in Inception are both defined by parental love and both separated from their children by circumstances that they cannot fully control, and both ultimately reunite with those children through extraordinary journey that transforms them profoundly. Inception and Interstellar differ primarily on scale and emotional directness. Interstellar is a more overtly sentimental film than Inception, more willingly to state its emotional themes explicitly through dialogue and to use the full orchestral weight of Hans Zimmer's score to amplify those emotions. Inception, by contrast, keeps its emotional core more rituously contained, allowing the grief and love at its center to emerge through structured revelation rather than direct sentiment. Both Inception and Interstellar represent Christopher Nolan at his most ambitious and most emotionally engaged. Fan of the Inception who have not yet experienced Interstellar will find it deeply rewarding, and those familiar with Interstellar will recognize in Inception the seed from which Nolan's father child emotional obsession fully bloomed. When ranking Inception against the similar films examined in this section, Inception stands alongside the very best of them. Inception surpasses The Matrix in emotional depth and philosophical ambiguity, though The Matrix exceeds Inception in revolutionary visual innovation. Inception rivals Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as an exploration of love, loss, and the architecture of memory. These are films that exist in the same emotional trajectory and both deserves to be ranked among the finest film of 21st century. Against Nolan's own work, Inception represents the director's most perfectly balanced achievement, the film where his structural ambition, emotional engagement, and visual invention are most completely and harmoniously integrated. Memento is perhaps more formally radical, Interstellar perhaps more emotional direct, but Inception synthesizes both quality, both qualities most completely. Compared to Shutter Island, Inception is the most philosophically sophisticated and formally ambitious film, though both earn their place in the canon of great psychological cinema. Inception occupies a unique position in the landscape of ambitious science fiction and psychological thriller cinema, a film that combines blockbuster spectacle with genuine intellectual rigor and deep emotional truth in a way that has never quite been replicated before or since. Inception critical reception has been overwhelmingly positive since its midsummer release in 2010. On Rotten Tomatoes, Inception holds a 87% critic score based on 364 reviews, a remarkably high percentage for a complex, high-concept blockbuster. The Inception movie's Rotten Tomatoes consensus reads smart, innovative, and thrilling. Inception is that rare summer blockbuster that succeeds viscerally as well as intellectually. Metacritic aggregates 42 critic reviews for Inception, resulting in a 74 score, indicating generally favorable reviews, while slightly lower than the Rotten Tomatoes percentage. The Inception Metacritic scores reflects a high degree of respect for the film's technical ambition and narrative complexity. Even from critics who found the plot occasionally dense, the Inception critical reception compares favorably to previous Christopher Nolan entries. For instance, while The Dark Knight achieved a 94%, Inception sits comfortably in the upper echelon of his film of his filmography. Major publications reviewing Inception include the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Variety, and The Guardian. The Inception reviews from these outlets range from 4 to 5 stars out of 5, indicating a largely unanimous critical opinion that the film was a masterpiece of original storytelling. Peter Travis of Rolling Stone was particularly effusive, calling Inception a chess match that played like a thriller. International critics responded to Inception with similar enthusiasm. Inception received particular praises from the Chairs du Cinéma in France and Sight and Sound in the UK, with reviewers often focusing on how Inception movie bridged the gap between art house intellect and multiplex spectacle. Roger Ebert from the Chicago Sun-Times gave Inception a perfect 4 by 4 rating, praising it as the film that exists in the space between the real and the imagined. The Ebert review of Inception highlighted the film's ability to treat the audience as intelligent participants. Ebert specifically commented commended the Inception emotional core, noting that despite the complex dream within a dream mechanics, the story never lost sight of Cobb's desire to go home. Rolling Stone's Peter Travers awarded Inception 4 by 4 star, calling the film a total knockout. This Inception review emphasizes the film's technical prowess and Nolan's directional confidence. According to Travers, Inception movie succeeds because it demands the audience's full attention and reward it with a narrative payoff that is both visually and emotionally stunning. The Inception review from Kenneth Turan at the Los Angeles Times scored the film highly, writing that Inception is a welcome reminder of what a big budget Hollywood movie can be. The review praised Inception's original concept, the performances of the immersive cast, and the seamless integration of practical effects. Empire magazine critic Ian Nathan gave Inception 5 by 5 stars, stating it's like the Matrix moved into your head. This positive Inception assessment focused on the film's pacing and structural ingenuity. Nathan compared Inception favorably to films like Blade Runner and 2001: A Space Odyssey, nothing its potential to become a foundational pillar of the sci-fi genre. Intellectual ambition critics noted Inception's refusal to dumb down its concepts for a massive audience. Reviewers highlighted how Inception used particle sets to create impossible images like the folding city. Not all critics embraced Inception. David Edelstein from New York Magazine gave Inception a lukewarm response, writing that the film felt clunky and over-explained. This negative Inception review criticized the amount of exposition. Edelstein argued that Inception fails because it spends too much time explaining the rules of dreaming rather than letting the audience experience them intuitively. The New Yorker's Anthony Lane rated an Inception movie poorly, stating the film was a lot of effort for a story that ultimately feels cold. The Inception review by Lane took issues with the film's emotional distress. According to Lane, Inception suffers from a lack of genuine human warmth, feeling more like a complex blueprint than a living story. The harshest Inception review came from some underground film critics who described Inception as hollow spectacle. These scathing Inception movie assessments attacked the film for being all brains with no heart, suggesting that the relationship between Cobb and Mel was not developed enough to sustain the film's emotional stake. Even some positive Inception reviews acknowledged certain weaknesses. The Guardian gave Inception 4 by 5 stars, but admitted that the plot can be a lot to handle in a single sitting. These mixed Inception reviews represent the moderate critical response, admiring the ambition while acknowledging the potential for viewer exhaustion. Audience reception of Inception differs somewhat from critical census in its sheer passion. The Inception Rotten Tomato audience score stands at 91% based on over 500,000 ratings. This Inception audience score is 4 points higher than the critics' score, suggesting that the intellectual blockbuster approach resonated deeply with the general public. On IMDb, Inception holds a staggering 8.8 by 10 rating from over 2.5 million user votes, placing it in the top 15 highest rated movies of all time on the platform. The Inception IMDb score indicates a nearly universal appeal among film enthusiasts. User reviews on IMDb for Inception trends overwhelmingly positive, with fans often citing it as the must-watch experience. The Inception cinema score from opening night audience was solid B positive. This Inception cinema score indicates that while audiences were impressed, the film's complexity might have caused some internal confusion compared to previous Christopher Nolan films like The Dark Knight. The Inception movie cinema score reflects its more challenging narrative-ish nature. Inception award recognition include 8 Academy Award nominations at the 83rd Oscars. Inception received nomination for the Best Picture and the Best Original Screenplay. The Inception movie Oscar wins were in technical categories: Best Scenography, Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Visual Effects. Technical achievements in Inception movie earned recognition from almost every major guild. The Inception cinematography by Valley Pfister was particularly lauded, winning the Oscar for its crisp, realistic look at dream world. Inception lost Best Picture to The King's Speech, a decision that remains a point of content for many sci-fi fans. Performance awards for Inception were fewer, but Leonardo DiCaprio received a nomination at the Saturn Awards for Best Actor. This Inception movie acting recognition marked another high point in DiCaprio's career. Citing groups honoring Inception included the London Film Critics Circle and the American Film Institute, which named Inception one of the top 10 films of the year. The movie's box office performance began with a $62.7 million opening weekend. The Inception domestic opening earned a surprising amount of an original R-rated style, though actually PG-13 film. This Inception opening weekend placed it at number one for that week in July 2010. The final worldwide Inception total reached $836.8 million. Notable Inception box office achievements include being the fourth highest grossing film of 2010 within the Christopher Nolan filmography. Inception remains one of his most profitable non-Batman projects. A direct sequel to Inception would likely explore the concept of limb further. However, Christopher Nolan has stated that the Inception ending is the conclusion of Cobb's story. While there are no current plans for Inception 2, fans often speculate about a spin-off focusing on M's and Arthur's previous missions. The success of Inception makes a return to this universe tempting for Warner Bros. But for now, the film stands as a perfect standalone epic. So, the final verdict is after this comprehensive analysis, review, and what's the final verdict on Inception? Inception movie ultimately succeeds at a landmark of 21st century cinema. The film's strongest element is its ability to marry a high concept premise with a deeply relatable story of a father trying to get home. The movie will be remembered as the movie that proved you can have a smart blockbuster. On a scale of 1 to 10, Inception earns a 9.5 by 10. This Inception rating reflects its near flawless production, incredible acting by Leonardo DiCaprio, and a script that still generates debate 16 years later. So, will I recommend this movie? Is Inception worth watching? Yes, absolutely. If you are if you appreciate films that challenge you, Inception is essential. Thank you for watching the this video and staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed this Inception video breakdown, please like and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on the Inception movie ending in the comments below. Thank you very much. Till then, stay safe. Bye bye.
Inception development began in 2002 when Christopher Nolan presented a 80-page treatment to Warner Bros. The Inception project oriented from Nolan's desire to explore lucid dreaming and the idea of people sharing a dream space. Initial Inception development involved Nolan realizing that the story needed to be a heist film rather than a horror movie, which was the which was his original concept. The Inception script went through numerous drafts over nearly a decade. Nolan developed the Inception screenplay based on his own research into the mechanics of memory. His approach to Inception focused on making the dream element
feel as grounded and tactile as possible. Warner Bros. Greenlit Inception in 2009 with a budget of approximately $160 million. Pre-production for Inception spanned several months. During Inception pre-production, Nolan worked with production designer Guy Hendrix Diaz to establish the visual style of each dream level. The Inception pre-production period involved rigorous storyboarding as the cross-cutting between four different dream levels required a perfect narrative map. Casting Inception took nearly 6 months. Leonardo DiCaprio joined Inception in early 2009 after several meetings with Nolan. The assembled Inception cast was a mix of Nolan's regular regulars Cillian Murphy, Michelle Caine, and new collaborators Tom Hardy, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Director Christopher Nolan's vision for Inception centered on architectural storytelling. Nolan wanted Inception to feel like a heist then that take places in a world with no physical limits. In interviews about Inception, Nolan explained, I want to create a world where the only limit was the character's imagination. Nolan's approach to Inception differed from The Dark Knight by leaning more into surrealism, yet he insisted on using practical effects. The Inception aesthetics draws from James Bond films and classic noir. Thematically, Nolan intended Inception to explore the concept of an idea as a parasite. The Inception narrative structure reflects Nolan's interest in time. As the team goes deeper into the dream, time slows down, a concept known as time dilation. Collaborated with cinematographer Wal Pfizer to ensure each level had a distinct color palette. The warm tones of the hotel, the cool blue of the snow fortress, and the grey, rainy city. Principal photography of Inception began on 19 June 2009 in Tokyo. The Inception production filmed for over 90 days across six different countries. Inception filming took place in Tokyo, London, Paris, Tangier, Calgary, and Los Angeles. The Inception production utilized a massive converted airship hangar in Cordington, England, for the hotel hallway scenes. This Inception filming location improved the space for the famous rotating set. The Inception crew spent 3 weeks filming the zero gravity fight at Carrington. Calgary, Canada, served as the setting for Inception's snow-covered fortress. The production chose this Inception location for its brutal winter landscape. Filming Inception in Calgary required the crew to battle sub-zero temperatures. Studio filming for Inception occurred at Warner Bros. Studios in Burbank, where, where sets like the Japanese castle were built. The Inception cinematography by Val Pfizer employed both 35 and 65 film. Pfister shot, shot Inception using reflex cameras with anamorphic lenses. The visual approach in Inception movie favored realism over dreamy blurriness, making the twist more shocking. The Inception score, composed by Hans Zimmer, features a heavily processed version of Edith Piaf's non-genie in. Zimmer's approach to Inception incorporated massive brass sections to create the Brahm sound that since been copied in hundreds of movie trailers. Visual effects in Inception were handled by double navigation. The Inception visual effect involved over 500 shots, but many were invisible enhancements of practical stunts. Major Inception VFX sequences include the Paris street falling and the Lebo City crumbling into the ocean. Inception contains numerous Easter eggs and hidden details that reward attentive viewers. This Inception Easter egg range from numerical patterns to musical streets secrets. Discovering these Inception hidden details adds layer of meaning to the spinning top ending. The Inception Easter eggs often connect to the cast's name. If you take the first letter of the main characters, Dom, Robert, Emma, Ariadne, Mal, and Saito, they spell dreams. Understanding these Inception references enhances appreciation of Nolan's attention to detail. For observant fans, Inception movie includes numerous callbacks. A significant Inception reference in the number 528491. This number appears as the hotel's room number, the combination to the safe, and the phone number given to Fisher. This Inception callback establishes how a subconsciousness can be primed by repeating patterns. Muscle cues in Inception reference to the song when played at a slower speed. The song matches the deep bram bass note of the Inception score, mirroring how time slows down for the characters. Inception contains foreshadowing regarding the children. Notice that in every dream, the children are wearing the exact